Welcome to today's informational webinar on the Safe Schools Fund Grant. We're going to turn it over to Gifty Quarshie, our Fiscal and Grants Analyst, to begin today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Gifty Quarshie. I'm the Fiscal and Grants Analyst at the Maryland Center for School Safety. So before we get started, I would like to mention that today's webinar is being recorded. You will have the opportunity to submit your questions via the WebEx chat. However, this feature would remain inactive until after my presentation. Once my presentation is over, the chat feature will be activated for a question and answer session. I will do my best to answer all of your questions. If additional discussions are required around any particular question or topic, then I may have to table that and follow up one-on-one with that individual. Finally, you will receive a short survey right after the webinar. Please take some time, please, to respond and let us know how this informational webinar has been helpful to you. And with that, let's get right to it and start off with first things first. So we are accepting applications for the fiscal year 2021 Safe Schools Fund Grant. I'm sure many of you have already had the opportunity, but the NOFA is available on the MCSS website, and it has all the information that you need for you to be able to apply. Now, the online submission deadline, and we gave ample time this time around, is on Friday, October the 30th, 2020. If you can get it to us by 5 p.m. on Friday, October 30th, then you've done your part. But of course, ideally, we would like you to, or we would prefer that you submit it sooner rather than later. But in case you need more time, you're covered either way. We understand there are a lot of different things going on now that need your attention. So we hope that the October 30th date will give you ample time to be able to submit your application. Now, the Safe Schools Fund Grant is funded through the state of Maryland. Over the last couple of years, I have received questions about how the Safe Schools Fund Grant is funded. So I would like to just emphasize that these are not federal funds. These grant funds are provided by the state of Maryland. Now, for this year, only local school systems are eligible to apply. So local school systems located within the state of Maryland are the only ones eligible to apply for this year's grant. I know last year we included non-public special education schools. That does not apply to this year's grant. MCSS has been appropriated $600,000 in funding for fiscal year 2021 for the Safe Schools Fund Grant. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you, especially if you've applied for this particular grant in previous years where we had a much larger appropriation. But this year, we only have $600,000 appropriated for this particular grant. So with all 24 jurisdictions, excuse me, this amounts to about $25,000 per local school system. Now, it's important to note that while you're allocated to $25,000, you still have to apply to be able to get the grant, first of all. You don't automatically get the $25,000. You still have to apply for the maximum amount in order to be awarded the maximum amount. You still need to be able to justify your request in order to be given the $25,000. Of course, you're free to apply for less than the maximum amount, but given the need that we've seen in previous years, I would be very surprised if any school system applies for less than that amount. We are also encouraging collaboration between school systems. So, if two school systems want to get together for maybe to host a particular training or any project that will benefit both school systems, we are encouraging that collaboration. And of course, if it's two school systems, then you would get to apply for $50,000 and so on. Now, finally, the application must be submitted from the MCSS website. We have a very brand new website that I can't wait to show you guys. But I will show you what that process looks like towards the end of my presentation. All right, so we have new requirements for fiscal year 2021. And I believe one of the major reasons why we're hosting this webinar is to be able to highlight those for you. And of course, again, if you have questions, we can answer them towards the end of this presentation. So what's new, right? Quite a few things, actually. Starting with the application process. So in order to apply for this year's grant, you would have to fill out the online application form from our website. There are no paper forms. There's no other way to submit application. You just have to be able to visit the MCSS website, use the form, and submit your application. Now, the other thing that's new is the performance period for the Safe Schools Fund. It used to be a 12-month performance period, which we were able to extend due to different circumstances over the last 2 years. Now, that provided a learning opportunity for all of us. And so we were able to just change it from the 12-month performance period to an 18-month performance period. So effectively, that's July 1 of this year to December 31st, 2021. We have also changed what we call the pre-award and the post-award grant forms. So part of the pre-award grant forms are itemized budget template and the project timeline template. These forms are required with each grant application submission. So both of these forms have to be downloaded, they have to be filled out and uploaded with your application prior to submission. If an application is missing either one of these forms, we will notify you and have you resubmit it or have you submit it. So I'm going to say this, and I'm sure many of you will be disappointed, but we do not, the C-125 forms are not required for this year's grant. The only forms that must be submitted in addition to the application requirements that are listed in the NOFA are these two pre-award grant forms. So again, the itemized budget template, which I will show you later in the presentation, and the project timeline template. Now, once an award is granted, we have the post-award grant forms, and there are different forms, or there are different types of forms that make up this post-award grant forms. They include the quarterly progress report form, the final project reporting form. We have the invoice template for you, and the grant change or the grant realignment request form. And you'll be using these forms after you've been awarded a grant to submit maybe your quarterly report or your final project report or reimbursement request as is necessary. So I mentioned the invoice template. So all reimbursement requests that you need to submit for your grant has to come to the Maryland Center for School Safety directly. No more submitting reimbursement requests through the MSDE AFR system. So for this year's grant, when you have a reimbursement, which we would require for you to submit on a quarterly basis or as you have it, we encourage you to use the invoice template to submit your reimbursement request. And of course, when you do, you have to include supporting documentation. So if you say you purchased a camera, we would need the purchase receipt. We would also need maybe photos of the installation, anything that supports that particular request. And you must use the available form. It's on our website and it will be available throughout the grant period for you to be able to download and fill out. So if you need to, say, submit a grant change request, you don't need to use the C-125A or B forms anymore. You can just download the grant change request form, which is also available on our website, and fill it out and submit it. Now, again, when you visit the website, we have the pre-award forms and the post-award grant forms available for you to make it easier for you to figure out which form you need to fill out. Now, as most of you know, the purpose of the grant is established in statute. So The statute lists the various categories that can be funded with the Safe Schools Fund grant. What we did was to simply align those categories under the POETI analysis. So what's the POETI analysis? It's planning, organizing, equipment or equipping, training and exercising. And I will speak more on this later in the presentation. The other point that I'd like to emphasize is the fact that the school safety sub-cabinet would only meet on a quarterly basis this year. As many of you know, in prior years, it was on a monthly basis. But for fiscal year 2021, the school safety sub-cabinet would only meet on a quarterly basis. That's why we recommend that you submit your application as soon as possible so that it can be reviewed in a timely manner by the sub-cabinet. Finally, MCSS will be conducting periodic grants monitoring. We just want to make sure that the grant is in compliance and that state funds are being used as is intended. So while the ultimate goal is to perform in-person grants monitoring, we do recognize that this is not possible with the current pandemic, right? So what we would do is we will perform what we call desk monitoring periodically. We will notify you at least 30 days prior to the monitoring request. So you are informed of all of the things that we would need during that monitoring request. So having said all of that, how did the Safe Schools Fund grant come about? I'm sure most of you already know this, but it is important to bring it up again for the benefit of the entire group. The Safe Schools Fund was established as a result of the Maryland Safe to Learn Act of 2018. The purpose of the fund is to provide grants to local school systems to enhance school safety. Now, MCSS administers the fund on behalf of the School Safety Sub-Cabinet. The School Safety Sub-Cabinet are the ones that review, approve, and award the grant from the fund itself. The Safe Schools Fund grant is a non-competitive grant. So the allocation is preset. Like I said, every school system is allocated $25,000. So the allocation amount is preset. And we can review the application. We as an MCSS can review the application as they come in. But at the end of the day, the School Safety Sub-Cabinet are the ones that approve and award the fund. Now, for competitive grants, that's usually not the case. We have to wait for all of the applications to come in before we review them. And of course, the amounts that are awarded vary based on the request and how the requests are justified. Finally, the Safe Schools Fund is one of 3 grants offered by the Maryland Center for School Safety under the Maryland Safe to Learn Act. The other 2 grants are the SRO grant and the hate crimes grant, which local school systems do qualify for. Now, if you do decide to apply for any of the other grants, you would have to submit a separate application for them. But today's focus is really just on the Safe Schools Fund grant. So what is the purpose of the Safe Schools Fund grant? I mentioned this briefly on a previous slide, but I'd like to go into it with a bit more detail. The primary purpose of the fund is to provide funding for school safety and security related projects. As I mentioned previously, the purpose of the grant is established in statute. So funds can be applied towards different categories of activities that relate to school safety and security. Now, what we've done is align all of those categories under either planning, organizing, equipment or equipping, training and exercising. And when you review the NOFA, as I'm sure most of you have had the chance to do, you will find that these categories, we have, again, all of the details under each of them, but you will be able to find which of the activities that you have planned fall under either the planning, organizing, equipment, training, or exercising. And our hope is that doing this will allow each jurisdiction to be able to examine your own capabilities and determine how best to maximize the grant funds. So just to provide some quick examples of what falls under each category, for planning, activities such as conducting school safety assessments, for example, or drafting emergency operation plans, marketing efforts targeted at both students and parents that highlight school safety and security initiatives, and purchasing outreach materials or software or apps, anything that falls under any of these categories. And again, the NOFA lists these into detail and actually has more categories for you to be able to determine if it falls under planning or maybe one of the other 5 categories. But all of these can be categorized under planning. Now, when you think about organizing, we want you to think about school-based behavioral health learning kits or social emotional learning kits and other wraparound services for students. And also informational materials provided to students and parents that address bus and pedestrian safety, personal safety, and other efforts to improve the overall school safety. And again, more information can be found on the NOFA. Now, this slide, I believe, is self-explanatory, but categories that fall under equipment, I gave this example before. If you install security cameras, that's an allowable use of the funds, and the fund can be used for the delivery of that security camera and the installation costs. Maintenance costs cannot be included in costs associated with installing the security cameras. Also, if you need to purchase emergency communication devices or other systems, that will be classified under equipment. And if you need, some first aid or trauma kits, you are allowed to categorize those under equipment. Now, when it comes to training and exercising, the Safe Schools Fund grant may be used for any of the activities that are listed here, and more extensively so in a NOFA. So if you're conducting training on de-escalation or behavioral threat assessment, trauma-informed care, restorative approach, or if you're enrolling your school security employees or mental health coordinators in any of the various training provided by MCSS or other approved providers, you should be able to use the Safe Schools Fund grant to do so. And the same applies to costs associated with developing and conducting school emergency drills, for example. All of those would be classified under the exercise category. So also, if you have traffic control measures that are designed to protect the safety of students and pedestrians around the school premises, you can include those under your exercising category. Now, I know I've said this a few times already, but the NOFA that's available on our website contains more detail on all of these categories. So funding for projects. While each local school system is allocated to $25,000, like I said, funding for projects will be reviewed and awarded based on the information contained in the actual application. So if we receive an application that does not include enough justification or enough detail on the project strategy or statement of need narrative, a detailed project description, the project timeline, which again, we encourage you to use the template provided by MCSS, or the itemized budget, you will hear back from us, right? So we will get back to you. We will tell you what's missing or what we need additional information on. And hopefully you'll be able to provide that for us, because what we want to be able to do is take your applications to the school safety sub-cabinet and have them review and award in that first meeting. Because again, if something is not approved in any particular meeting, we would have to wait for the next quarter for the school safety sub-cabinet to be able to review that application. So we just want to implore you all to just take some time, make sure you include enough detail in all of the application requirements. Now, for this year, given everything happening with COVID and its impact on our schools, the School Safety Subcabinet will consider funding projects that support COVID-related activities. Now, this does not include any personal protective equipment, but it includes maybe equipment or programs or projects that is of or that is beneficial to the entire student body instead of individuals within the school system. But again, this is going to be reviewed on individual basis. So as we get the request, we will review it, and if additional information is required, we will let you know. It's also important to note that any project related to training, and I'm sure many of you already know this, but any project related to training or specific service deliveries must be provided by a trained professional or a subject matter expert. Now, with everything going on, the acceptable forms or formats of training include webinars, aka what we're doing now, seminars, also virtual if possible, and other technology-based training. Now, in-person training is included because it's an overall funding or project that is funded under the Safe Schools Fund grant. But with everything happening, it's highly unlikely that we'll be able to host a lot, if any, of in-person trainings. So what we did this year, and this is based off of all the things that we've learned over the last 2 years that we've given out the Safe Schools Fund, is to list out what is an allowable use of the Safe Schools Fund grant and what is not allowable. Now, of course, this list is not conclusive. Maryland Center for School Safety and the School Safety Subcabinet reserve the right to, after reviewing applications, to come back to you and maybe advise you on what has been submitted, whether it qualifies or does not qualify. And we'll always give you opportunity to maybe resubmit if that's the case. But the list that we included for what's considered allowable and what's considered an unallowable expense, the NOFA, of course, has a more extensive list. But while the list itself, like I said, is not conclusive, we hope that it provides some guidance on what can be included in your request. Everything on this list, is self-explanatory, but I just wanted to emphasize that the School Safety Subcabinet will not approve any in-state or out-of-state travel requests related to this year's grant. Again, the School Safety Subcabinet will not approve any in-state or out-of-state travel requests related to this grant. So we have good news, right? We have a lot of things that are allowable. Contractual services or personnel expenses are allowable. Materials and supplies are allowable. I spoke about equipment and we talked about cameras, but radios are also allowable. And training to include the different formats that I highlighted in the previous slide. So it shouldn't be an issue if one thing is not allowable. At least there are other various projects that this funding can be used towards. So tying it all together, I know we've gone over things briefly here. As I previously mentioned, in order to receive any funding under this grant, you must submit an application. Without an application, we can't do anything. We need you to be able to submit the application, and I'll show you how that process works. When you do, please remember to use the itemized budget template and the project timeline template provided on our website. Once you're awarded a grant, please use the post-award grant forms, like I mentioned, as necessary for your specific request. So if you're submitting a quarterly report, you just need to go to our website, look under the post-award grant forms and use the quarterly reporting form and submit your quarterly report. If you are requesting reimbursement for the FY21 Safe Schools Fund grant, please submit the reimbursement directly to MCSS. This funding will not be available in the MSD AFR system for you to be able to draw down. If you need to submit a grant realignment request, again, use the post-award grant forms that is available or that is provided on our website. So before we go to our question and answer session, I wanted to just, quickly show you the application form and some of the other pre-award grant forms that I spoke about. All right, so please bear with me while I switch to a different screen. All right, so this is the current fiscal year 2021 grant application form. I hope you're all able to see my screen. Now, when you go to our website, the form is it's under the pre-award forms. The first thing that you will see, in fact, let me show you that before I show you the actual form. When you visit the very brand new, absolutely beautiful Maryland Center for School Safety website, this is going to be your landing page. Now we wanted to make it easy for you to be able to just go to the specific things that you need. In this case, we want to be able to visit the grants page. So when you click the grants page, you have all of the different grants that we're giving. And like I said, we have 3 grants: the hate crimes grant, the SRO grant, and the Safe Schools Fund grant. So for the Safe Schools Fund grant, when you click it, it has some information on the grant, some description. And right below that, it has grant documents, so the pre-award grant documents. So it includes the NOFA, the actual application form, the Safe Schools Fund grant itemized budget template, and the project timeline template. Now, once you've been awarded the grant, you would need to use the quarterly reporting form, the final project reporting form, invoice, and the grant reallocation request form. And the link will be available very shortly. Now we have, some frequently asked questions that we hope are going to be helpful to you from the onset of the process. But if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure I've received email or responded to emails from just about all of you. Or you can always send an email to the grants review team email inbox, which is the mcss.mcss@maryland.gov email address. And one of us will respond to your email on a timely manner. So, going back to the application form itself, when you click it, this is where it's gonna bring you to. So the first thing that we wanna know is what type of organization you are. And in this case, if you're a local school system, you would just select the local school system. Now, depending on the type of organization that you select and the type of grant that you select, the application form will adjust with, asking you for different questions. So in this case, if you're a local school system and you qualify for all 3 grants, which you do qualify for all 3 grants, please don't expect the application process to be the same way as, for Safe Schools grant as it is for a hate crimes grant. Some of the questions that we asked in the Safe Schools Fund grant are not part of the questions that you might see under the hate crimes grant. But for the purposes of this exercise, let's just select the Safe Schools Fund grant. Once you do that, we want you to be able to list the head of your organization. We want the point of contact phone number, all of these. We also, very importantly, want you to select the jurisdiction for your school and some other additional information. Now, we ask if you are receiving funding for this project. Why do we ask that? Well, while this grant fund, or while you're only allocated $25,000 for this year's grant, your project may end up, costing $50,000, for example. If that's the case, we want you to first tell us if you are receiving another funding for that project. And if it's a yes, we will ask you to list that funding source. If it's a no, you don't need to worry about that. Now, we want you to be able to put the full project cost. So if it's $50,000, we want you to list the $50,000 there. And when it comes to the requested grant funds, will the form allow you to put more than $25,000? Yes, it will. But at the end of the day, the grant would only be reviewed and awarded up to the maximum allowable amount of $25,000. Now, once you put that amount, the funding category is, again, listed as I explained previously, based on all the different categories that were already established in statute. So again, having reviewed the NOFA, or after you review the NOFA, you will be able to determine if your project falls under planning, organizing, or both. And it does allow you to select more than one category if that's what your project dictates. The start date, we want you to put the beginning of the grant period, which is July 1. So even though you may be submitting your application on August 5th, for example, we want you to use the start date of the actual grant period as the start date for this project. And the end date is the same thing. We want you to use the December 31st, 2021 date. Now, once you've done all of that, you still have to upload the actual justification documents, right? Your project strategy statement, your narrative, the budget template, or the spend plan, and the project timeline. So we want you to upload all of that document. Of course, you have to acknowledge all of the information that you have put on there and just click submit. We actually think the process has been simplified, but after you go through it, if there are any improvements that you think we can make, please feel free, email me, or again, send an email to the mcss.mcss@maryland.gov email address. And, we'll be more than happy to incorporate the change if it's something we feel like it's going to be beneficial to all of our school systems. The goal is, again, to simplify the process and hopefully make it easier for the applications to go through. Now, I also talked about the grants itemized budget template. Again, it's a very simplified form. It has some directions for you, but you just need to list your organization name, organization head. Certain fields are locked, so you won't be able to make any changes. But if what you're asking is salary related, this is where you would list that item. Again, we want this to be line item details. So if you have additional information, then that needs to be included in the actual application itself. If you have contractual services, you will list that line item here. You would list the requested grant funds for that project. And if you have other fund sources, we do want you to list that. At the end, it's just going to tabulate all of your totals. Once you do this, we want you to be able to save it and attach it with your grant application itself. And again, once we open up the chat and you have any questions on this, please feel free to ask. And finally, the grant project timeline. The reason why this is helpful is for if you do need to maybe ask for a realignment request. Hopefully we wouldn't have any, extension requests, but again, things happen, right? So for now, the 18 months time period is the only performance period that's given. But if maybe you want to request, an extension, you can request it. Whether it's approved or not, I can't say for sure right now. But you can always request grant extensions. Maybe you want to realign grant funds towards a different project. Filling out this form on the onset or when you submit your application is actually helpful so that when you do request, a realignment or extension or anything of that sort, we are able to go back to the original project and maybe come up with questions. Maybe things happen that you weren't able to, execute a particular project as you predicted, but this helps us and this helps you to be able to see what was put in on the onset and whether, again, you're on course to spending the grant funds in the time that you estimated or if changes need to be made. Again, it's a very simple form. We ask that you fill it out and we ask that you include it with your project submission once you submit your actual application. And so with that said, let me leave my contact info on the screen for you. And I will conclude my presentation by opening it up for questions. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this webinar. Craig Meister, our Communication and Engagement Manager, will be reading the questions as they come in. I haven't been able to see if anything is coming yet, but Craig will read them out. Again, thank you so much. We hope that this is one of many technical assistance calls that we will have. So in the future, please expect communication from us. And we'll be more than happy to make this work for all of our benefits. So thanks again.
So ladies and gentlemen, if you do have questions, please feel free to share them in the chat box. If you don't immediately see the chat box appearing on your right, you can click on what looks like the thought bubble logo, which should be appearing somewhere in the center of your screen right below Gifty. So again, feel free. This is a wonderful opportunity to ask the person who knows most about this, everything and anything that may be coming to mind as it relates to this very wonderful grant application. Again, feel free to type it in. I'll be able to read it to Gifty. And we'll keep it open for a couple moments, just in case some people are taking some time to type. And so we'll be right back at you, but let's hold tight. And again, if you have questions, this is a great time to share them.
Thank you.
It's possible that Gifty did a very good job, and no question.
I was going to say.
We have one. Yeah, I think Gifty did a great job. Okay, so Lieutenant Mark A. Miel, excuse me. Thank you for this webinar. Can we get a copy of the slides? Is a question.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Miel. I will. We will send out the slides after the presentation for you to be able to have access to it. Yes.
The next question is coming from Tiana. I may have missed this. Are non-public schools eligible for the Safe Schools Fund Grant?
So for this year, Ms. Johnson, non-public special education schools are not eligible to apply for this year's Safe Schools Fund Grant. You know, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but for the fiscal year 2021 grant, non-public special education schools are not eligible. But we have another grant, the Hate Crimes Grant, which is available on our website. I would advise that you visit the website and just go through the NOFA. That is one of the grants that our non-public special education schools do qualify for.
Wonderful. The next question is, can you please clarify the COVID-19 plan requested for upcoming grants?
So that question might be a little bit general, but COVID-19 as it relates to the Safe Schools Fund Grant, all we're saying is that the School Safety Sub-Cabinet may consider COVID-related requests, right? So as long as it's not for personal protective equipment, the MCSS, of course, and the School Safety Sub-Cabinet will consider you know, any specific request that has to do with COVID. Now, if there are other COVID-related plans, I don't know if you mean the recovery plans or the going back to school plans, those are completely separate from this particular grant. The only COVID-related grant information or request has to do with the Safe Schools Fund Grant. And as long as it's not a personal protective equipment, the School Safety Sub-Cabinet will consider it for approval.
Great. The next question is from Angie. Will there be a webinar for the SRO grant?
That's a very, very good question. Yes, we will have the webinar for the SRO grant, and the hope is to have one for the Hate Crimes Grant as well. Now, no date has been set yet, but we expect that it will be very soon in the near future. And when that's done, we will send out the notification, yes.
SROs are on people's mind because we also have a question from Andrea. How will COVID-19 and school closings impact the SRO grant?
That's a very good question. I mean, if anything is evident, it's the fact that COVID-19 has impacted just about everything that, we consider normal or everything that we did in the past. I can say for a certainty that it does not impact the grant in terms of it not being available, right? So we do have the SRO grant for FY21. Now, with schools, most schools going virtual for at least the first semester, it's actually dependent on each school system to, of course, make a case for how their SROs are going to be relevant during that time period. Now, for example, we had instances where the SROs were on school premises during meal distributions, for example. So if that's something that meets each school system's request, then yes, you can include that in the actual application. So as long as the school has an SRO assigned, and as long as the school system decides to use that SRO, even with virtual learning going on, again, all of this has to do with how you justify your request. So if you're able to justify your request and we're able to determine that it meets the purpose of the fund, then we will be able to review it accordingly. But again, hopefully we'll be able to provide more information on the SRO grant and how it's impacted with COVID-19 and everything going on during that webinar.
Wonderful. There's a number of people thanking you, Gifty. This is a great last call for any questions related to today's presentation, which was very informative. But again, it's always nice to get follow-up. There's no stupid question, as they say in fifth grade. All questions are welcome. And again, this is your last chance for at least this presentation. But I will have Gifty repeat one more time, if we don't get any final questions, how best to contact her with any questions moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. So if there are no final questions, I thank you very much. I have absolutely enjoyed all of my interactions with all of you. I know you all can put a face to the name now, and I hope I get to meet most of you during one of the monitoring visits. Well, as soon as we're able to start, making contact, the physical contacts again. But I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity. And, you all know I'm always available. Just send me an email, gifty.quarshie, the number 4, at maryland.gov. Or the best way, which is what I recommend, is the mcss.mcss@maryland.gov. That way, if I'm not in the office or I'm away, one of my team members will be able to provide a timely response to your questions. But again, I'm available even after this webinar. If any question comes to mind, just feel free to reach out to us. But thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Gifty. And again, thank you everyone for your attendance. And we will be sending out slides for today's presentation to all attendees shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.